Good morning, I'm Sophia Kai. Welcome to this news briefing from the 251st National Meeting and Exposition of the American Chemical Society in San Diego. We're joined today by Dr. Kenneth Suslick from the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. He'll be talking to us about his work on an artificial nose designed to protect artwork from pollution. Dr. Suslick?
Thank you. Pollutants are bad for people, but they're even worse for artwork and other cultural heritage objects. In fact, the recommended levels of air pollutants acceptable for museum artwork are about 100 times lower than those acceptable for human beings. There are two reasons for this. First, human beings can heal, artwork can't. And second, human beings have finite lifetimes, artwork doesn't. So museums have a problem. How do they monitor pollutants, particularly inside sealed display cases where objects themselves can emit reactive gases that can autocatalytically damage the artwork? And the answer right now is there aren't any good methods. We've been working for about 10 years now on colorimetric sensor arrays as an opto-electronic nose. And these are essentially digital, multi-dimensional extensions of litmus paper. We have an array of different chemically responsive dyes. Think of it, if you will, as a color barcode. And on exposure to reactive gases, the colors change, and we can monitor the concentration of these different gases as a function of time by looking at the color change of the sensor array. The way in which we do this varies. In our laboratories, we often use an ordinary flatbed scanner. We have also developed a handheld, about the size of a cell phone, a little thicker, that is able to do pattern recognition analysis in real time. And for this work, in collaboration with the Getty Conservation Institute and the Walt Disney Animation Research Library, we developed the use of an ordinary cell phone for direct imaging on site of a traveling exhibition, of the first traveling exhibition of Disney Studio artwork going to China. So the artwork went to Beijing and to Shanghai, and we had on the back of a number of these pieces our sensor arrays both on the outside of the artwork and inside the sealed container, so-called passepartout, that holds the artwork, a frame in a small, thin, sealed container. And what we were able to find was that sorbents that were placed on the back of the artwork did indeed work, and the level of air pollution inside the sealed container, the passepartout, was much lower than outside. But we also discovered a source of sulfide pollutants being released from one of the components of the passepartout. And by looking at each individual component that made up the frame, we were able to demonstrate that in fact it was the acrylic plastic window at the front, on the front of the frame, that was the source of a low level but easily detectable with our sensor array of sulfide contamination.
Terrific, thank you so much. We'll now move on to the question portion. If you could all just state your name and affiliation before asking a question and wait for the microphone, that would be terrific.
So it's Kath O'Driscoll from Chemistry and Industry magazine. Can you perhaps say a little bit more about some of the pollutants that are most damaging for these works of art? What pollutants exactly are you monitoring, and at what particular levels?
Sure. The pollutants of most concern for artwork are oxidants, particularly ozone and NOx, formaldehyde and other aldehydes, but primarily formaldehyde, and acids, acetic acid, formic acid. These are the most important oxidants, and we're able to monitor those at very low levels. The way these concentrations are generally given are a mean concentration over time. So part per billion days is the typical unit. That is to say, being exposed to a part per billion for a day over some real length of time. And our sensitivities are right now about 500 times better than conventional Draeger tubes, which are the conventional monitoring system used by museums, and much less expensive.
How have you achieved that sensitivity? How have you been able to get to that sort of level of detection?
The biggest improvement in sensitivity is due to digital imaging, rather than using the eye in a more qualitative fashion. Digital imaging allows one a much more precise quantification, but also greatly improves sensitivity to small changes in color. In addition, by miniaturizing the array, we need very little gas, and so exposure is much more rapid, and the color changes are therefore also more sensitive.
Can you give an example or two of those color changes? What's the chemistry going on? Some of those color changes?
In the array we have a number of different dyes that are chemically responsive to their environment. We have good old-fashioned pH indicators that are sensitive to acids. We have redox dyes that are sensitive to oxidants. We have other dyes, metal ion containing dyes, that are responsive to amines, and we have others that are responsive to sulfides. And so by having a whole bunch of different chemistries, we can probe a wide range of different oxidants. We do this in a cumulative fashion. So one of the changes in our sensor arrays from previous work is that given the very high sensitivities needed for monitoring pollutants for artwork, we changed chemistries so that the reactions are essentially irreversible and therefore dose cumulative.
All right, thank you very much.
Sure. Another question? Oh, go ahead.
Becca Traeger with Chemistry World. You talked about a little bit about expense and comparing this to the conventional tubes that are used. Can you say more about the expense and what's of this versus the conventional processes by museums?
Conventional sensing is multiple dollars per analyte. So if you want to monitor acids, you have to use a separate tube than if you want to monitor oxidants and so on. And it's also generally requires some kind of active pumping. But we've used these arrays in a passive mode. And so in this cartridge, the most expensive component is not the array, it's actually the microscope slide. And microscope slides are clearly disposable. So pennies per printed array are the kinds of costs that we're talking about. And This cartridge is meant for active sampling, where we have a handheld that actually pulls air over the array. But for passive sampling, you just have the strip. And it is literally stuck to the backside of the mat, of the mounting of the artwork itself.
Oh, she had a follow-up.
Can you say again what the traditional method used? You said something.
There are several, but the typically Draeger, Draeger, or A with an umlaut over it, is the conventional gas sensor that museums tend to go to. But the truth is they don't monitor artwork because it's too expensive. And one of the problems is you really have to monitor every different sealed display case. So you need to have hundreds and hundreds of sensors. And unless the cost of your sensor is as low as ours, it's simply not practical for a museum to do that.
But you say it would be practical with yours.
Yes, exactly.
Oh, right behind you. Oh, okay, go ahead. And then we'll go back. That's fine. No, go ahead.
Hello, Elizabeth Hawkins, London School of Journalism. I just wondered, what's the protocol once you found out that there's a pollutant that could be potentially damaging an artwork? What does the museum then do?
Most of us don't realize, but in display cases in museums, there are hidden compartments that contain sorbents. And they are there intentionally to scavenge pollution. The problem with using a passive sorbent is you don't know when it's saturated. And so it's the same kind of problem that one has with a gas mask. You don't necessarily know when it's no longer functional. So having an array to monitor would be a significant improvement in the protection of artwork. In the case of the passepartouts used in China, there's actually sorbent in a board form on the back of the artwork that, again, we don't see. We see the artwork, but on the back side there's a sheet of solid silica that's used. It's called ArtSorb, and its function is to protect the artwork in situ.
Did you have a question? Right behind you.
Bela Suslick, Office of Public Affairs. You mentioned that there were some sulfide emissions.
Yeah.
They're from the material that was involved in the protection and so forth. What did you ever do about it?
Well, it's actually it's a low enough level so that I don't think anyone knew that there was a potential problem from this material. What one does under these kinds of circumstances is you start speccing the volatiles emitted by the acrylic plastic sheet and go to another manufacturer or work with a manufacturer to produce a lower emitting polymer. One of the problems in the field of art conservation is it's really currently quite difficult to monitor trace, that is to say, very low levels of pollutants released by materials that go into display cases. Some are well known. Oak, for example, turns out to be an emitter of both sulfides and aldehydes. And one doesn't normally think of hard woods as a problem, but in a sealed environment, that can be a problem for the artwork contained in in the display case.
How frequently do you have to change your sensors? Obviously, to get a low enough detection level, you've got to be minimizing the amounts of material in there because if you just overload the thing, it will detect forever, but you're not going to see it.
Yes, you have a good point. Our arrays were used for a total of 180 days for the traveling exhibition in China. And by the end of that time, for some of the analytes, they were indeed expended. But in general, the rate at which the array consumes itself depends on the concentration. And that's sort of good news. If the concentration is low, then you don't have to change the array very often, and you don't have to worry about the consequences.
Now, how do you monitor the rate of use? Reflectance, not necessarily visually. Human vision is great, but not quite.
We used an iPhone 4S, and we had a little mount so that the iPhone was kept at a constant angle, and we had the array in a special trapezoidal box so that it filled the screen of the iPhone precisely. And Kristen McCormick, the collaborator with the Walt Disney Animation Research Library, was able to take images of each of the arrays before they left California, after they arrived in Beijing, at the end of the Beijing exhibit, at the beginning of the Shanghai exhibit, so after shipping, at the end of the Shanghai exhibit, and upon return to California. And so we have snapshots of each of the arrays from those times, and this allows us to do a rather detailed analysis after the exhibition.
Now, do you have any kind of an estimate as how much actual damage has happened in China? Because most of these places like Shanghai and Beijing are extremely polluted. There's got to have been some changes.
I understand your question. I don't have a quantitative answer for you. But you would be surprised at how well the Passepartout protected, at least from oxidants, the artwork. And so the differences between the array outside of the Passepartout and inside the Passepartout are really quite striking.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Dr. Suslick. That's all the time we have right now, but you might be around for a little bit.
Sure.
And the archived version of this session will be posted at bit.ly/ACS Live San Diego. And please join us for our next press conference today at 1 p.m. on how DNA origami could help build faster, cheaper computer chips. Thank you very much.